The Krell Empire didn't believe in ghosts, they believed in math. And the math was simple. 9,900 warships against one tiny planet called Earth. It wasn't supposed to be a war. It was supposed to be a weekend chore. But then, the screaming started over the long-range radio. No explosions. No laser fire. Just the sound of metal tearing like paper and the panicked voices of commanders who realized too late. They weren't the hunters, they were the prey. 20 minutes, that's all it took for the greatest fleet in history to vanish. When the smoke cleared, 9,883 ships were gone. Only 17 survivors escaped the Earth meat grinder. And they didn't come back with a victory, they came back with a warning. They told the Galactic Council that humanity didn't use shields or plasma. They used the laws of physics as a weapon. They didn't just defeat the fleet, they harvested it. This is the story of why the galaxy now calls Earth the Forbidden Zone. This is why you never attack a species that has nothing left to lose. The galaxy called them the unbeatable. The Krell Empire had never lost a war. Their fleet was a forest of steel moving through the stars. 9,900 warships, each one the size of a city, floated toward the tiny blue planet. To the Krell, Earth looked like a defenseless marble. It had no planetary shields, it had no giant laser towers, it looked like an easy prize. High Commander Valak stood on the bridge of the flagship. He looked at the scanners. The humans are silent, he said, his voice cold and confident. They are likely hiding in their holes, waiting for the end. Begin the descent. I want this planet conquered by sunset. The fleet moved as one. It was a beautiful and terrifying sight. 9,900 ships broke through the clouds, lighting up the sky of Earth like 1,000 falling suns. People on the ground looked up, but they didn't run, they didn't scream, they just waited. Valak watched the monitors. He expected Earth's primitive missiles to fly up at them. He expected weak radio signals begging for mercy, but there was nothing. They have accepted their fate, Valak laughed. Target their major cities. Prepare the landing craft. Then, it happened. It didn't start with a bang. It started with a glitch. Suddenly, the Star Crusher's navigation system began to scream. Warning. Unidentified objects detected in high orbit. The computer yelled. Valak looked at the screen. Thousands of tiny dots were appearing everywhere. They weren't ships. They were too small. Are those rocks? Valak asked, confused. No, Commander, a technician replied, his hand shaking. They are canisters. Thousands of them. The humans launched them months ago. They were hidden behind their moon. The canisters didn't fire lasers, they simply opened. Inside were billions of tiny needle-sharp balls made of hardened tungsten and depleted uranium. They weren't high-tech, they were just heavy and fast. Because the Krell ships were moving so quickly toward the planet, they hit these clouds of metal with incredible force. It was like a car hitting a wall of bricks at full speed. The Krell shields were built to stop heat and light lasers and plasma, but these were solid pieces of metal. The shields didn't even react. The tiny needles ripped through the Krell ships like paper. In the first 10 seconds, 500 ships simply disintegrated. Their engines exploded. Their hulls became Swiss cheese. The screams over the radio were deafening. Valak watched in horror as his beautiful fleet began to fall apart. Evade, move to the lower atmosphere, Valak ordered. He thought they would be safe near the ground. He thought the space trap was the only trick the humans had. He was wrong. As the remaining 9,000 ships dove into the thick clouds to escape the metal rain, they fell right into the second trap. The humans knew the Krell relied on grav engines to float. These engines used the planet's magnetic field to stay in the air. Suddenly, every radio tower, every power plant, and every hidden station on Earth turned on at once. They didn't send a message. They sent a massive, concentrated EMP electromagnetic pulse wave. But it wasn't a normal pulse. It was tuned specifically to the frequency of the Krell engines. The sky turned a strange, glowing purple. On the bridge of the Star Crusher, the lights flickered and died. The hum of the engine stopped. A heavy, terrifying silence filled the ship. For a moment, 9,000 massive warships simply hung in the air, gravity-less and dead. Then gravity took over. Power. Give me power, Valak screamed, hitting his console. But the screens stayed black. Outside the window, he saw his sister ships beginning to tilt. They weren't flying anymore. They were falling. The massive ships hit the atmosphere's lower layers. Without shields or engines, the friction of the air began to burn them. The unbeatable fleet was now a rain of fire. Valak's ship groaned as it hit the thick air. He looked at the ground. He expected to see a primitive world. Instead, he saw thousands of small, hidden bunkers opening up. Small, fast human jets, machines that didn't use grav engines but old-fashioned combustion, roared into the sky. They were like sharks circling a wounded whale. The humans weren't fighting a war of technology. They were fighting a war of physics. They used the Krell's own weight and speed against them. We have to land, Valak cried out as the Star Crusher headed straight for a dark green forest. We can fight them on the ground. We are warriors. As his ship crashed into the trees with a bone-shaking thud, Valak didn't know that the nightmare was just beginning. He had lost 5,000 ships in space and 4,000 in the fall. Now, he was on the ground, in the dark, on a planet that clearly hated him. He pulled his sidearm and looked at the 100 soldiers left in his room. Stay together, he whispered. From the shadows of the trees, a low sound started. It wasn't a machine. It was a whistle. A human whistle, then another, then hundreds. The humans were coming, and they weren't bringing lasers, they were bringing the hunt. The crash of the Star Crusher was like an earthquake. The massive ship had carved a mile-long scar through a dense, ancient forest. Smoke filled the hallways. The bright, sterile lights of the Krell Empire were gone, replaced by the flickering red glow of emergency fires. Commander Valak pushed a heavy piece of metal off his legs. He was alive, but his pride was dead. He looked around. Out of the thousands of crew members on his flagship, only a few dozen were standing. They were coughing, clutching their blue-blooded wounds, and looking at the dark windows. Outside, Valak ordered, his voice trembling. The ship is a coffin. We must find the other crash sites. We still have thousands of soldiers on the ground. We can win with numbers. The survivors forced the heavy airlock doors open. When they stepped out, the heat hit them. But it wasn't just the heat of the fires. It was the smell of earth. The smell of wet dirt, rotting leaves, and something else, something predatory. The forest was called the Black Woods by the locals. It was a place where even humans sometimes got lost. To the Krell, who lived in clean metal cities in space, it was a living nightmare. The trees were tall and thick, blocking the moonlight. Every shadow looked like a monster. "Check your scanners," Valak whispered. "Sir, the scanners are useless," a soldier replied. "The magnetic pulse from earlier fried the sensors. We are blind." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the trees. Every Krell soldier spun around, pointing their plasma rifles into the darkness. Their weapons glowed bright purple, casting long, scary shadows. "Who's there?" Valak shouted. "Show yourself." There was no answer, only the sound of the wind. Then, from the top of the trees, a small object fell. It bounced off a soldier's helmet and landed on the ground. It was a small, round piece of fruit, half eaten. "It's just nature," a soldier sighed, wiping sweat from his eyes. "This planet is just animals." But Valak looked at the fruit. It hadn't been bitten by an animal. It had been cut by a blade. A clean, sharp metal cut. "Eyes up," Valak screamed, but it was too late. From the branches above, dark shapes dropped like stones. They weren't using jetpacks, they were using ropes. The humans didn't make a sound. They didn't scream a battle cry. They worked in total silence. One Krell soldier was pulled upward into the trees by a wire loop around his neck. He vanished into the leaves before he could even fire his gun. Another soldier was tackled into the mud. A human in green and brown camouflage sat on his chest, jammed a knife into the soft gap of his armor, and vanished back into the bushes before the others could react. "Fire, fire at everything," Valak roared. The Krell began shooting wildly. Purple plasma bolts melted trees and set the forest on fire. The bright light blinded the aliens, but it didn't hurt the humans. The humans knew this land. They were using the guerrilla-style hit and run, hide and wait. Valak realized with horror that his soldiers were wearing bright, shiny armor. In the dark forest, they were like glowing targets. The humans, however, were invisible. They were part of the mud. They were part of the shadows. As the Krell ran deeper into the woods, trying to find an open field, they started hitting traps. These weren't high-tech traps. They were primitive and cruel. One soldier stepped on a leaf-covered hole. Large wooden spikes, sharpened to a point and smeared with toxic mud, impaled his leg. Another soldier walked into a tripwire that released a heavy log covered in jagged rocks. It crushed him instantly. "Why aren't they using their tanks? Why aren't they using their planes?" a survivor cried out, his voice high with panic. Valak understood now. "Because they don't need to," he whispered. "They are saving their fuel and ammo. They are letting the planet kill us. They are hunting us for sport." The Krell tried to use their communicators to call the other 8,999 ships. For a moment, a signal came through, but it wasn't help. It was a symphony of death. Through the radio, Valak heard the sounds of the other crash sites. One group was being hunted in the snowy mountains by humans on white skis who moved like ghosts. Another group, which had crashed in the desert, was being picked apart by snipers from 2 miles away. The Krell couldn't even see who was killing them. The most terrifying realization was the human endurance. The Krell were tired. Their lungs hurt from Earth's heavy oxygen. They needed to rest, but the humans didn't stop. They followed the Krell for hours. Miles after miles, they didn't tire. They just kept coming, walking at a steady pace, knowing the aliens would eventually collapse from exhaustion. By the time the sun began to rise, Valak's group of 100 had shrunk to 20. They reached a small clearing near a river. They were covered in mud, blood, and fear. "Wait," Valak said, holding up his hand. In the middle of the clearing stood a single human. He wasn't wearing high-tech armor. He wore a simple vest, a hat, and held a long wooden rifle. He was sitting on a rock drinking water from a metal bottle. He looked calm. He looked like he was on a morning walk. The 20 Krell soldiers aimed their plasma rifles at him. "Don't move, Earthling," Valak shouted. The human didn't look scared. He put his water bottle down slowly. He looked at the 20 exhausted, terrified aliens and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that had finally backed its prey into a corner. "You're the last ones from this ship, huh?" the human said in a low, gravelly voice. He spoke their language. "You guys put up a decent fight, but you forgot one thing about Earth." "What?" Valak hissed, his finger trembling on the trigger. "We don't like uninvited guests," the human said. He whistled a short, sharp sound. From the trees surrounding the clearing, Hundreds of red laser dots appeared. They weren't on the trees. They were on the Krell. Every single alien had 10 red dots on their chest and head. The human stood up and pointed toward a small, black scout ship hidden under a camouflage net near the river. That ship is fueled and ready. It has enough power for one jump. Only 17 of you are going to fit. Why? Valak asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. Why let any of us live? The human picked up his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. Because a story isn't scary if there's no one left to tell it. Go home, tell your empire what happened to the 9,900. Tell them Earth is closed. The journey back to the Krell homeworld was silent. The small scout ship, designed for only 5 people, was packed with 17 survivors. They didn't speak, they didn't eat. They simply stared into the black void of space. Commander Valak sat in the pilot's seat, his hands shaking so violently he had to lock them into the armrests. When the ship finally exited hyperspace near the Krell capital planet, the orbital defense grid didn't recognize them. They looked like a piece of floating trash, burnt, battered, and broken. Identify yourself. A booming voice came over the comms. This is a restricted zone. Valak took a deep breath. His voice sounded like it belonged to an old man. This is Commander Valak of the Star Crusher, requesting emergency landing for the survivors of the Earth invasion. There was a long, heavy silence. Then, the voice came back, cracking with disbelief. Commander, the fleet. Where is the fleet? We have been waiting for the victory signal for weeks. There is no fleet, Valak whispered. There is only us. The landing was not a parade. There were no flags, no music, and no cheering crowds. Instead, the ship landed in a secret military hangar surrounded by the High Council and the Empire's top generals. When the airlock hissed open, the generals stepped back in horror. The 17 survivors stumbled out. They weren't the proud warriors who had left. Their armor was cracked and stained with the red mud of Earth. Their eyes were wide, darting around at every shadow, every sudden movement. One soldier began to scream when he saw a decorative potted plant in the hangar, thinking it was a human hiding in the leaves. The Grand Emperor, a tall Krell with golden armor, walked toward Valak. Commander, explain this. We sent 9,900 ships, the most powerful force in the history of the galaxy. How can 17 people be all that remains? Valak fell to his knees. He didn't look at the Emperor. He looked at the floor. They didn't fight us like soldiers, sire. They fought us like nature. They didn't care about our technology. They used our own gravity to burn us. They used our own fear to hunt us. Nonsense, a general shouted. Humans are soft. They have short lives. They have no empire. That is why they are dangerous, Valak said, finally looking up. His eyes were bloodshot. They don't have an empire to defend. They have a home. Every tree, every mountain, every river on that planet is a soldier. We tried to conquer a world, but the world fought back. Valak then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, blackened metal disc. It was a human data chip given to him by the man in the woods. They told me to give you this. They said it is a gift. The Emperor took the chip and placed it into a holographic projector. The room darkened. The image wasn't a message of war, it was a video. It showed the 9,883 crash sites across Earth. It showed the massive Krell ships being pulled apart by human machines, the metal being melted down to build parks and playgrounds. It showed human children climbing on the rusted husks of the unbeatable tanks. Then the camera shifted. It showed a map of the galaxy. A red circle appeared around Earth. Then, the circle began to grow. It grew past the moon, past Mars, and past the edge of the solar system. A voice spoke. It was the same gravelly, calm voice of the man from the forest. To the Krell Empire, the voice said, "You came to our house without knocking. You tried to burn our forests and kill our families. We could have destroyed your ship too, but we wanted you to see. We wanted you to know that we aren't hiding anymore." The map zoomed out further. It showed the Krell capital. "You think you are the hunters because you have big ships," the voice continued, "but humans have been hunting since we lived in caves. We are very patient. We are very good at following tracks. And now we have your tracks." The holographic map showed thousands of tiny, fast-moving signals leaving Earth's orbit. They weren't giant warships. They were small, sleek, and built for one thing: speed. They were moving toward Krell space. "We don't want your stars," the voice said, "but we will make sure you never leave them again. Consider Earth a closed sign for the rest of your lives. If we see a Krell ship in the sky ever again, we won't send 17 messengers back. We won't send any." The hologram faded into a single sentence written in the Krell language: "Do not attack Earth." The Grand Emperor looked at his generals. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor felt cold. "What do we do?" he asked. "We hide," Valak said, standing up. "We turn off our lights. We silence our radios. We pray that they decide we aren't worth the hunt." That night, the Krell Empire, the greatest power in the galaxy, went dark. They turned off their orbital stations. They hid their ships in underground bunkers. They lived in fear of the sky, waiting for the space orcs to arrive. On Earth, the man in the forest sat by a campfire. He wasn't a general or a king, he was just a scout. He looked up at the stars and took a sip of his coffee. The galaxy was a big place, and for the first time in history, it was finally quiet. Humanity didn't want to rule the stars. They just wanted to be left alone. And after 9,883 ships were turned into scrap metal, the galaxy finally understood. The most dangerous animal is the one that just wants to go home in peace. The story of the 17 survivors became the most famous legend in the universe. It was taught to every alien pilot as a warning. If you see a blue planet with a single moon, the teachers would say, turn around, don't look at it, don't scan it, just run, because Earth is not a prize. Earth is a graveyard.